Sex is symbolic of so many different things, of social values, of growing up, of attachment relationships, of physical limitations, of everything. I mean, there's so many different things that go into sexual challenges and sexual pleasure. So when someone is coming into me and expressing, the desire for change sexually, it's a really exciting place because change is actually really possible when it comes to sex. I mean, it's really a lot of information and practice because sex, as you said, and as I've said, and as many others have said, sex is a skill.
Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Love. Today we're going to talk about love and relationships and sex with one of my very favorite people, Todd Baratz. Todd, thank you for being
Hi.
with us.
Hi, Robin. Thank you for having me. You're one of my very, very favorite people. I'm excited to
I
see your face.
I sincerely love you. I really do, Todd. And I'm so
Same,
happy that we're
boo.
together this morning.
Me too.
So I had so much fun reading your book this week.
Oh, I'm so
And
glad.
it's awesome. I know for those of you listening,
Thank
it may not
you.
be out right now. Oh, actually, it will be out by the time this podcast is out. So,
Yay.
your book is called How to Love Someone Without Losing Your Mind.
Which you
I
will lose your
love it.
mind, but then you get it back, which is the good part, and then you lose it again.
Yes, you do, Todd. And
It's
like,
just
I love
a
the fact
roller coaster.
it is, and I love the fact
It
that
is.
that is the reality of love and relationships,
It is.
is that you're
And
it's
life,
like. And life in general, we're just going to lose
everything.
our minds on a regular
Yeah,
basis, but we'll get it back and then we'll lose it
yeah,
again.
yeah. Up and down, all around.
Yes. So I wanted to start by just asking you to please tell our community about yourself, a
Sure.
little bit about your background. I know you're a couples therapist and personal therapist, and this just give us a little bit of a synopsis of who Todd Barrett is.
Who Todd Baratz is? Well, I'm actually trying to figure that out. It's ongoing, but I do know my
Yeah.
name and what I do and what I like. So I'm Todd Baratz. I'm an LMHC, so that's a licensed mental health counselor. I'm also a certified sex therapist. I've been a client in therapy for my literal entire life. I've never stopped. So I'm helping people. I'm being helped by a team of people. um, and wellness, relational wellness, sexual wellness is really something that I'm very passionate about, as corny as that might sound, but it's very much what I live and breathe in terms of my own life and my personal life and my professional life, and it's something that I get a lot of meaning out of. So
Yes. I
I'll
know
say that
you
about
must be
myself.
just an awesome therapist, Todd. In the book, you are just so real about the fact that, in school, you're taught these are the rules. This is the game. You're not going to talk to your clients about yourself and your personal journey, but you're like, fuck that. You tried that, right, in the beginning, and
Yeah,
you're like, that's
I
not who I
started
am. I'm
out
not
and it
gonna,
just,
right?
yeah, it felt so incongruent. And that's not to say that I'm like talking about the trauma I have with my father with my clients, but it's also
No.
not to say that I won't like pepper in my personal experiences.
Yes. And you're funny, right? You talk about how you bring humor into
I
therapy,
hope
which,
so.
yes,
I
yes,
mean, when it
yes.
comes to this shit, we really got to learn to laugh at it. So, especially when we're talking about sex, like we have got to laugh. Like some people, we talk about sex because we're so afraid of it with such fear, and I'm like, remember, we're not talking about death. This isn't cancer. This is sex. It's fun. It's playtime. So, and especially when it comes to our relational issues too, we have to learn to laugh. So I do try to have a laugh or two at least in each session, and hopefully the reader will have a laugh.
I laughed a lot when I was reading your book, Todd.
Great.
So tell us
Mission
about,
accomplished.
yes, so tell us about how you started writing your book, How to Love Someone Without Losing Your Mind. Like, what was the impetus of that and kind of the process and why you thought it was important to put that work in the world?
Well, I've always loved writing, and it's always something that's really stimulating for me. It's really peaceful for me. There's nothing more that I like than being alone and just writing. But it comes from a personal place, like what I was saying in terms of being in therapy. I've been in therapy forever, and so part of what's been so impactful and healing for me is writing my own story. So not literally, but figuratively in my mind and talking it out and developing a verbal narrative. But writing it all down was really a wonderful experience for me, both writing down my personal experience and my professional experience. And what really motivated me the most was, as I was saying, being in therapy for so long, being in relationships and struggling for so long, and also being a therapist with my clients, couples and individuals who were struggling with these same exact things. And being on Instagram and hearing from hundreds of thousands of people struggling with the same exact things that I was struggling with, that my clients were struggling with, that the couples I was seeing were struggling, like all of the same stuff. So it really just became clear to me that dual perspective, the dual roles that I play, there's this huge intersection where we all kind of meet in this collective experience. So it came from that. And I also just think that hearing about a therapist's life is interesting because I think which maybe I'm biased and maybe that sounds narcissistic of me, but a lot of people objectify therapists as, problem-free, perfect people, or as, the most fucked up of us all, as some people like to say. But I think it's interesting to hear how somebody who heals. And so I thought that was also an important piece of the story. So it comes from a lot of...
I agree. You share a lot about your life, your upbringing, and your relationship with your ex-partner Alex that you were together with for a decade. I just love the fact that you're sharing so much about your story and the lessons that you learned. And so Todd, can we just talk about that? Even just like the fact that, of course, I think you're sharing your story about your upbringing and how you were raised outside of New York, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you had, yes, you have three brothers. So they're four boys.
4 boys.
Wow. Yes, 4 boys.
My
okay,
mother,
you grew
how
your
she
mom
did it.
and your dad. You share openly that your dad was abusive towards all
He was
all 5 of
towards
you.
all of us, yeah.
Right?
It was hard.
Yes, of course that was. And you're in therapy since you were like 12 years old. Is that right, Todd?
Yeah, I mean, my parents, my family was really dysfunctional, but the interesting part was, this was in the 80s and 90s. They brought me to therapy when I was 10. So it's an interesting, juxtaposition, seeing, dysfunction, yet bringing kids to therapy. I mean, they should have gone to therapy, but they brought us to therapy instead. But anyway, yeah, I started therapy at 10. I was very young, which has changed my life.
Yes. And what I really appreciate about this is like you're saying, you are, okay, and then you came into the therapy world. You wanted to become a therapist. And just this journey of following that passion, but knowing that, you were stepping outside of what your family, like, because your brothers worked for your dad, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there was all that journey of almost disconnecting from, and are you still disconnected from your family? You are, right? You write about that in the book.
Yeah, I'm still disconnected from my family. I don't get into it too much, but we don't speak anymore, which has been hard.
Of course it is. And so the therapy, of course, your therapist became a family member.
He's very much like a surrogate father, benevolent uncle, and he's still in my life. I have a session with him soon. I see him. Yeah. I've been seeing him every single week since I was 15. It's pretty wild. I haven't stopped.
And how could our childhood not affect? This is what you go into. It's like we're all fucked up. Like that's kind of like one of the messages that you give us. It's like even though I'm in therapy, you've learned in wonderful ways. Yes, Todd, I love that.
Yeah.
But you're very raw and real about the fact that even with everything you've gone through, and you are a therapist, you've learned all the tools to teach others how to heal. It's a lifelong journey.
Lifelong. I mean, there's this thing called trauma. It's the gift that keeps giving. No matter how much information and knowledge you have. I mean, I see clients and I've been seeing them forever and they say similar things that I've said. I can't believe I still do ... I can't believe I'm still talking about fill in the blank. And I'm like, I've been talking about that for 25 years with my therapist. We all have these pieces of ourselves that resurface, that are triggered, that we struggle with and that we will likely struggle with for the rest of our life. I mean, not maybe at the same intensity, might vary, but there are pieces of ourselves and parts of ourselves that, we're hurt and we still carry with us. So, yeah.
And so you are a sex therapist and you go into, I loved how at the summit you talked about the topic. Yeah, the topic at the summit, your topic was, it's not just sex.
Yes.
Because people come into your office and they want help with sex. Let's talk about this. We're not having it. We're having difficulty with it. And so what is your approach from the very beginning when somebody comes in and says like we're so uneducated or maybe unskilled too. In the book you talk about the skills necessary for having good sex. So just can we walk us through that? Like an example of you've got a lot of clients that are coming to you with sex problems.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has sexual problems,
Yes.
firstly. Every single person has sexual problems, and if someone hasn't, they will at some point. And if they don't, I don't believe them. They're repressed.
Yeah.
And that's something that I said when I was speaking, and I really firmly believe it. We live in a culture that's so negative and phobic, and we have such challenging relationships when it comes to expressing our emotions that when we go to express ourselves sexually, there's no way that there aren't going to be a challenge, that we're not going to experience a challenge. But sex is symbolic. Sex is symbolic of so many different things, of social values, of growing up, of attachment relationships, of physical limitations, of everything. I mean, there's so many different things that go into sexual challenges and sexual pleasure. So when someone is coming into me and expressing, the desire for change sexually, it's a really exciting place because change is actually really possible when it comes to sex. I mean, it's really a lot of information and practice because sex, as you said, and as I've said, and as many others have said, sex is a skill. And so it really requires practice and work. And that practice and work pays off if you do it.
Yes, it's so empowering when you're offering that advice. It's like, it is a skill and we can learn these skills and practice.
Yeah.
And talking about it, right? You say sex is psychological. Like I put that in bold. Like, so what does that mean exactly?
Well, I mean, our biggest sexual organ is our brain. Everything happens sexually in our brain. And what happens in our brain is psychological, philosophical, cultural, all of the things. So sex is mediated by all of those different systems that we have inside of us. Everything from the relationship we had with our mother to what we're having for dinner, to if we're constipated. It's literally everything. But it starts in our brains. It starts in our heads. It's psychological.
Yeah.
And by that I mean it's a mix of emotional and relational experiences and how it becomes a dynamic with whoever our partner is.
Yes. Something I also appreciated, Todd, is you talk about performance anxiety and how we all experience performance anxiety in the bedroom at some point. There was so many insights. I was like, yes, I love that. And you say performance anxiety affects everyone. What's interesting is that we don't consciously register our performance anxiety until after sex is happening. Like you're in it, right? And it could be any number of things like that will like cause you performance anxiety. Like, can you explain how can you give us an example of that? Of like how.
Well, so sometimes it's unconscious anxiety. Sometimes performance anxiety is, oh no, I'm worried I look bad in this position, etc. Oh no, my partner is going to reject me. Oh no, I'm not hard enough, I'm not wet enough. Sometimes there's a conscious narrative. Other times is more unconscious, and it's when our body is speaking to us but our mind's not caught up yet. So that's like if you're not getting aroused but you're totally there and you're like, why is this not happening? I don't understand, body. Let's go. And the challenge with that is then it really creates performance anxiety because it creates a feedback loop where there's an interaction between the psychological and the biological. The biological meaning you're responding, you're noticing that something's not happening. Psychologically, then you respond and you say, hey, why? What's going on? What's not happening? And then that actually exacerbates the problem of a lack of arousal. So then it's just a cycle. And then what our body does is it prioritizes the stressful hormones, which really obliterate any chance for arousal. So there's a variety of different types of performance anxiety, but the ones that I find most interesting are the unconscious ones, of course, when, we're with a partner and we want to go there, but it's simply just not happening. And I've had this experience many times, and this is what I worked through when I was very young with my therapist. As you would say, but the line he uses, your dick, you want to go there, but your dick doesn't. And then we would talk about why, and usually it would be about something related to trust, safety, comfortability, body esteem. There was a lot of meaning that my mind, while I was like, oh my God, this is hot, I want to do this, my body was like, I don't feel safe with this person, I don't trust this person. And so by examining that, I was really able to learn how I can approach relationships differently when it comes to sex so I can feel safer, so I can feel like I trust somebody, or not have sex with them.
Right.
So a variety of different types of performance anxiety, both conscious and unconscious. Both annoying though.
Yes, and it's just so real. It's like the fact that it could happen. You could be in a relationship with somebody for a long time, and you're both want to do it, but like even in the middle of the act, you're like, oh my god, I'm totally something's your mind is racing or something's going on, and you're like
Yeah.
having unconscious anxiety, right?
Yeah.
And so
Or it could just be you're distracted.
yeah, you're just distracted. And so,
Could be both.
what would you recommend somebody if that happens to you, like after the act or whatever, or even just right then? Why not just would you like want to engage in a conversation about it? I mean, just be open and honest, or like tell me what would be the
Well, there's no
recommendation
right
there?
or wrong. There's no right or wrong.
No.
When I'm seeing a client, there's usually multiple components of it. There's the first component, so there's the action-oriented component of, okay, so what do we do with our bodies? What do we like? What can we actually do about this? So if you're feeling performance anxiety and you're freaked out, whether it's about rejection or you're bored or whatever it is, you're not connecting with your body. So the action-oriented part of this would be to strengthen the muscle of connecting to your body, to focusing on the pleasure, and to being present. A lot of mindfulness is helpful for that, and just simply redirecting your mind to your body, and decreasing the pressure you're putting on yourself to perform in a certain way. And so that is something then that you just have to practice over and over and over, and then it will become something that's more of a reflex that, that we all have had experience in that reflex where it's not even an issue and we just have sex and it's fun and we're present. And then there are other times when we're not. And so it really just requires a lot of practice. Sometimes the best way to practice this is during masturbation because no one is there. You don't have to worry about all of these other relational dynamics that cause anxiety. But either way, those are some of the more specific actions that you can take right away, every day, to work on some of that. The other part is the symbolism of it all, how this is symbolic often. Like I was saying, for me, it often becomes about trust and safety in relationships. And so that is related to my attachment issues. That is related to my traumas, where, for me, it's hard to physically open up to somebody sexually because it's very vulnerable for me. It's hard to do that if I don't think the person is actually going to stick around. And so that's why at the beginning for me of dating, if I really like somebody, sometimes it can be hard for me to open up sexually fully until I feel like I can trust them. And so knowing that is helpful for me because then I can say to them, hey, just so you know, blah, 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 blah. And I can really work on creating the best possible scenario for myself to feel empowered in my body and to feel safe. And also introduce the idea of trust and work on fostering it with new partners. And for other people it's different, but there's always meaning that I think is really helpful to uncover and unpack. So we make the unconscious conscious with some of these sexual issues. And that can also help the more action-oriented work, because we're not feeling so bogged down by, well, I don't understand why this is happening. Oh, I know why it's happening, and this is what I do to work on it. And then this is what I do to practice and work on it, and then eventually the anxiety will dissipate. But so it's a whole process.
It is a process. So one of the skills that you talk about is, and I don't think there's a lot of people that really practice this possibly, is selfishness in the bedroom.
Yes.
And self-care, like while you are like intimate with somebody. And you say what like it this was to me, I was like, yeah, like you want to prioritize your pleasure and understanding yourself and your body knowing yourself. And talk to us about that. Talk to us about like being selfish and how that's not a bad thing.
The idea of being selfish, people freak out about. And it's not deprioritizing your partner's pleasure. It's not disregarding
No.
their safety. It's not discounting, minimizing, gaslighting, not doing anything about your partner. Being selfish is more about connecting with yourself first sexually, prioritizing your pleasure first sexually, and then your partner. And sometimes people think about this in a cartoonish way where it's like very slow-mo, and it's like, well, me, and then. But it's a simultaneous process once you can become connected with yourself and your desires and preferences, where it's not a matter of, okay, now I'm only thinking about myself without the capacity of thinking about my partner. We can connect with ourselves and think about our partner at the same time, but we can't just be focused on our partner's pleasure without first connecting with our own. So being selfish and also I didn't use this word, and I can't remember what author did, but they used the word ruthless. Being ruthless with that. Because oftentimes what happens is that we get into this, especially in a long-term relationship, we get into this way of wanting to take care of our partner because we know them, they made us dinner, we made them dinner the night before, there's an emotional dynamic, there's emotional intimacy, and so oftentimes those relational dynamics can continue over to sexual dynamics. And so then that idea of being selfish can kind of go out the window, where we can just spend more time concerned about our partner's pleasure and what they're going to like, and so we keep them happy and etc. And so being selfish often requires a ruthlessness to let go of some of that emotional caretaking and to really just focus on taking care of yourself. And again, not to disregard your partner and as a simultaneous process, but first connecting with yourself. But it's important. It's really the only way that we can experience pleasure. And if you think about it, whenever I talk to somebody, I say, well, what's the thing that turns you on the most? People always say, seeing my partner turned on. Having a mutual sexual experience where both people are connecting first with their sexuality and their preferences, and both people are experiencing simultaneous levels of arousal, that's what often turns people on the most. So it is required, even if you're saying, well, I like pleasing my partner. Part of pleasing your partner is pleasing yourself. So that, again, comes back to the idea of selfishness. And we could just call it being connected to yourself, if selfish is a scary word, but it's important.
Being connected to yourself. While I would say absolutely the same thing. If it was just all about self-pleasure, what I get the most out of is absolutely having my partner. We're both enjoying it. Like we're both having the pleasure. Not like, and sometimes it is. Of course, you're taking turns, but yes, I love that.
Yeah, the mutuality. That's what makes sex exciting.
Yeah. Okay, I want to talk about relationship contracts. And I want to, okay, can you talk to us about relationship contracts? Because I've talked to different people and therapists about this, Todd, but I want to hear your take on what that looks like. Like for instance, you're in a new relationship. Are you willing to talk about that? And I want to ask about, do you have a relationship contract with your partner? And
no.
like when you're no? Okay. Well, I want to understand having that discussion and what kind of things you would want to include in a relationship contract.
Well, I mean, like, it's not a moral issue to me. It's not like I'm like, this is good, this is bad. I think it's an individual preference.
Just agreements.
We have we have spoken agreement. They're not unspoken. I speak about my needs very often, maybe too much. No, I mean, agreements and understanding is really necessary for relationships. If you want to call it a relationship contract and you want to get out pen and paper, I mean, go for it. If you want to go through a list of things with your partner of what you'd like and the types of relationship that you'd like to cultivate with them, I think that sounds wonderful and beautiful. And I think some of the things that we can include in that, the first thing has to be about safety, has to be about empathy, has to be about compassion and kindness. Has to be about how we treat one another, right? In terms of what, like meanness is a no, name calling is a no, screaming and yelling is a no. I mean, a lot of these things, could be helpful to cover with partners, but especially just in terms of the minimal, the basic expectations around safety and how that's created, which is empathy, kindness, flexibility, and things like that.
And so what about, for instance, like one of the things that I wrote down was like mismatched libidos. If you're running into that and it's something that is like, how would that be part of a contract or an agreement? Like if let's just say I really want to make love and my partner says I'm not up for that. So then we could come up with some sort of agreement where it's like, okay, well, you let me know when you would like to again, or like, so how would you communicate mismatched libidos to each other if that was like an ongoing issue?
Yeah, I think I posted something like about a relationship contract once, and one of the slides on it was about sex and negotiating sex and talking about sex and having that be not a rule, because I don't like the idea of rules, but having it be a piece of the connective tissue. And having that be something that's regularly addressed, because like we were saying 5 minutes ago, Everyone has sexual problems, and every relationship is going to have sexual problems. And one of the most common sexual challenges is mismatched libidos. Every relationship, every couple has a mismatched libido. It's rare
Yes.
that the
Of
two
course,
people
you're not the same
have
people.
the same exact levels of desire at the same time, unless you have the same work schedule. I mean, it's just not going to happen. So, I mean, if a couple is seeing me, or if this is you or me, you know, the idea would be, okay, if you're going to decline sex, one, you do it really fucking nicely. So many people are just saying, no, get off me, don't touch me. Don't do that. You know, you want to hug your partner, you want to look in their eyes and give them a big kiss. You're hot. I love you. I'm fucking exhausted. I worked a 12-hour day and whatever. But let's have sex, you know, tomorrow at 3:15. I don't know. Or if they don't offer the alternative, you can say, okay, that's fine. What about tomorrow? Can we pencil in a date? And take that seriously.
Yes.
So that's something, but to do just at least in the moment. But anyway, you know, part of a relational contract about addressing sexual issues is addressing mismatched libido and developing a plan and developing the skills to decline sex and developing the skills to reschedule sex if you're declining sex. You know, it's a real negotiation. Any kind of difference, you know, what do you want to eat for dinner tonight? You would negotiate it. It just wouldn't be so emotionally charged. It wouldn't create rejection. It wouldn't create major disappointment. Usually not. So it's something to talk about, to communicate. But it is hard. I mean, I see couples that are crying and fighting and screaming because they're not having sex and they're not talking about not having sex. One partner really wants it. One partner is just indifferent. And even the dynamic itself can exacerbate the mismatch and the libido, can exacerbate desire problems, which is even more frustrating. Right? Because you have a couple with mismatching libidos, and then they don't address it, and then not addressing it brings up passive aggressive behaviors. Then sex becomes this big monster about when we're having it. It becomes so emotionally charged, and then it becomes an entire dynamic that actually strains the relationship and prevents sex from happening in the first place. So it's a really big deal. So it's something to talk about from the very beginning in your relationship. What's going to happen when desire declines? How do you want to manage that? And if you haven't talked about it in the beginning, it's never too late. You can talk about it anytime.
I think what this points to, Todd, over and over again in your book, is really how important it is to have open communication.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, and I know we it's kind of like that word is overused, or maybe just people are missing the mark. But really, it's like having these conversations. And I know it could be scary, but it's like we have to have them. And even if they're difficult, it's like taking away that there is going to be fear. But it's like, if you don't talk about it, it's going to become bigger and bigger and bigger. And that issue that was could have been a good little conversation has now turned into like a major relationship problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard. And the thing is yes, we're talking about communication so much. Communicate. It's important because historically, my parents never communicated about anything. People didn't communicate.
Nope.
Now we're communicating about everything. So yeah, it's a really important piece, especially with sex. But the other thing that I'll say is that what's also just as important is to understand, actually, I want to go back. You said it, it's scary, is to understand that you have to accept the fact that you're going to feel uncomfortable and you're going to have to tolerate that. Because for most people, communicating, especially about sex, about really any kind of relational issue, is going to feel uncomfortable. So that's the first step. People are like, I want to find a way to do it where it feels great. At the outset, it may not. You have to tolerate it. Secondly, we want to think about what stops communication and why aren't you communicating? I get so many questions. How do I tell my partner that whatever, fill in the blank with whatever, anything sexual, non-sexual? And I'm like, my response is, well, there's a lot of anxiety implied in this question. What prevents you from communicating? Which is just as important as telling someone to communicate. We have to understand what shuts us down, what causes us to withhold and stay internal, and usually that there's a big story there. So it's really, really an important piece of this kind of trend of encouraging people to communicate. Yeah, communicate, reflect. Reflect about why you're not communicating. Reflect about why you think you can't communicate. Reflect about why you can't find the words to communicate. When we spend all day communicating and when we can't communicate about sex, or we can't communicate about our needs or about our disappointments, you want to examine why that is.
The examining
it's a really
piece.
important piece, yeah.
The self-reflection piece. Todd, you had this awesome story you shared during the podcast we did before In Bloom. And you said, I think it was something that you wanted to talk to your boyfriend about. And it was, you're like, first I journaled. Then I talked to, like, first I thought about it, then I journaled, then I talked to my therapist, and then I talked to my partner. So
Yeah.
it was like
Having
this
flashbacks.
four
Yeah.
stage
Oof.
process of like that. The first three pieces were reflection. I mean, working with a therapist is like, okay, reflect back to me. Am I on the right track here? Can I ask for some assistance, some help? And then the fourth step was talking to your partner. I just thought that was beautiful. Like that's a great example of like doing a lot of the inner stuff before the communication directly to your boyfriend.
Yeah, I mean, communication gets really reduced down to just the act of speaking, but it's so much more. I mean, it's
Oh
about finding the
yeah.
reasons and the whys and then understanding what you actually really want to communicate and what you're prepared to listen in. I mean, with the responses you're prepared to get and why your desires are coming up in the first place. But yeah, it's a process.
Yeah. Can you talk to us about what differentiation in the book? You talk about differentiation. I've never heard this before, and I learned that when I was reading your book. So this is we want to get to this point of differentiation, but it's deeper than just a place of. Will you explain differentiation to us, please?
It's similar to what I was talking about in terms of being selfish sexually. Is the differentiation people often think about as being different, which is true. They often think about, well, being independent. But differentiation isn't about independence. It's about connecting with yourself first. The best analogy is people often say, we're in the same boat. A differentiated couple is not in the same boat. A differentiated couple is in two separate boats that get closer together and get more distinct. So the idea is that you become more distinctly yourself while also with your partner. Whereas so many relationships, we just lose ourselves, right? And so
Yeah.
we over-compromise, we people please, we self-negate to the point where we've completely lost ourselves. So I don't want to say antidote, but the response to that is to become differentiated. So to really connect with what we want, who we are, and to do those things first before we do the self-sacrificing and the people-pleasing and all of that stuff. And that's not, again, to disregard your partner's needs for safety or their emotional needs or anything, but it is just really about connecting with yourself first. It's the easiest way to understand it. Differentiation is something that happens, it begins in childhood. It starts usually around adolescence when we start becoming different from our family and we start exploring who we are and what that could mean. And ideally, we're in families that encourage that and say, of course, go do something that no one in this family has ever done before. I was not in a family like that. I was really discouraged in exploring my own independence and exploring what it meant to be myself. And so differentiation for me has been really hard in relationships. But it's a story that starts in childhood. It starts with family rules and family values and the systems in our family. But it is really a story about what does it mean to become myself while in a relationship. And it's
I
really
love
fucking
that.
hard.
It is really fucking hard. But Todd, I really like that. How you said it's like, okay, and you did talk about this in the book. You're two different boats, but you're becoming more distinct and more
Yeah.
yourself
That's a
in
quote
this
by David
relationship.
Schnarch. Does a lot of great writing about differentiation in his book, The Passionate Marriage, I think. But it's a great analogy
It
because we
really
are on the
is.
same page in the same boat. But that's really not the goal of our relationships. We don't own our partners and we don't want our partners to own us. And the thing that actually makes our relationships thrive is that we're different. That's oftentimes what brings us to our partners in the first place is the differences. We are drawn to that. That's what makes sexuality and eroticism between two people thrive. When two people merge, I think Esther Perel says this, there's no one to connect with after that. So really remaining true to yourself and connecting better with yourself is crucial in relationships to become differentiated.
Yeah. You give an example of a couple that, like, I think we could all relate to this. If you're fighting with your couple, right? Or with your partner, you're having a conflict, you're having a disagreement, and you're taking how they're feeling or behaving very personally. We can all do this. We've all done it,
Yeah.
right? And so, in
Yeah.
the example of that, it's like you're saying, how do you differentiate in that issue? You're like, okay, how they're acting is not a reflection of me, and it's not, can you give us like just a reframing on like,
Yeah, so I
you
mean, a
give a
common
story in the book.
example is that I'll see a couple and one person will give a criticism. I need more whatever from you. And the person receiving that criticism is unable to hear that as my partner wants something from me. It isn't saying that I'm bad, but they're saying that they want something from me. And I know that I'm separate. I know that I'm connected to a sense of self that's, fundamentally good. And I can hear my partner's complaints about me while staying connected to that sense of self. So I can listen to their complaints, I can hear their criticisms, so long as they're not saying, you're a piece of shit and being mean and awful and toxic. I can hear their criticisms through the lens of a sense of separateness, right? So they're not saying that you're this terrible person because you did this thing and you need to do this whatever. You're hearing them saying that this is what they want. They want more of something because they want more of something.
Yes.
And it's really hard. Because oftentimes what I'll see is that it's a lot of personalizing, and what that is really a more clearer way of saying that is that we take responsibility for our partner's emotions, and so that taking responsibility means that we take ownership over their emotions, and that's again not to disregard their emotions or the impact we might have on them, but it's to say that we can't be responsible for them. That we have to see ourselves as being separate from our partner's emotional experience.
Right. And the empathy piece is saying, I'm with you. I see you where you're at. I'm not responsible for that, but whatever you're asking me here, I'm gonna work on making that change possibly, so that, right?
Yeah, on responding, not being responsible
Yep.
for. Because when we take
Responding, not being responsible. Oh yeah,
and
that's
this is a
good.
learned experience from childhood. When we take responsibility for our parents' emotions, if our parents are sad as little kids do, we assume it's our fault, and that's the same thing that happens as adults. We assume it's our fault when we take responsibility for their emotional experience, and that's not to say that we can't be accountable. It is accountable. It's just to say that there's a certain level of separateness that's required when we're listening, that is hard to do, which is where learning about differentiation can really come in handy.
Yeah. I think it's
But
just
a crucial piece of
yeah.
that is understanding yourself. You can't become a differentiated person without understanding your history, and you also cannot become a differentiated couple without understanding your partner's history. Because part of that story is to say, I know that my partner gets anxious if I'm not filling in the blank. When they're coming at me with this criticism, I know that I didn't do anything wrong. I know that this is their earlier trauma, and I know that it's getting stirred up. So I'm going to steady my own emotional response and stay connected to myself and be present for them, and to understand that this is something for them that they need from me for their anxiety. And it's, I call this emotional karate work in my book because it's really fucking hard, or Mission Impossible. But it's another skill that I'm practicing, and that's really, really hard. That's important.
It is really hard, Todd. I just like, but these are skills that we can learn and we can practice and we can get better at. It's like,
Yeah.
I think there were so many repeat lessons that you taught in the book is around the fact that, like, come on, people, I'm a therapist myself. I know all the skills, and I'm still. But one of the things I want to say about this, Todd, and maybe you can reiterate or let me know if this is true, is because you do have the skills and you are practicing. Maybe the timeline on like when you fall off or you're in it, it's like is shorter. Would you say that's true? Are you able to come through things kind of like faster?
It's
Or
shorter. It's adult.
shorter?
I mean, when I was doing this as
Yes.
a kid, I was drinking, I was drugging, I was hurting myself. Now I take really fucking good care of myself, as I've said, as you pointed out. I journal, I do my therapy, I do this. I'm very kind of careful at it. It doesn't mean I don't get overwhelmed or feel dysregulated or feel emotional heartbreak and suffer. It just means that that the choices I'm making in my life are always acting on my own behalf. I'm not making bad choices that interfere or create dysfunctional patterns in my relationships or in my overall wellness like I used to. And that's the key here, is that the self-awareness gives room to choice. We can make better decisions. So instead of just passive-aggressively or aggressively spiraling out of control to my partner, I pause, because I have an awareness of it. I make better choices so that I can communicate better. It's not that these things don't happen, it's that things slow down a little bit in a way where I can digest it and make better choices with what I do with it and my behaviors. Hopefully.
Yes.
Have to get the reviews back from him though.
Well, we'll talk in the future because I want to hear more about that. Things are things going well in your new relationship, Todd? Can you share that with us, or things? Tell us a little bit without telling us too many details.
Things are going well. I mean, we're having challenges, but the interesting part is that we're working through them. Whereas in my past relationship, we didn't really do any work to work through them. So it's interesting to see what that's like. And so where that goes, who knows? But it's kind of cool to be able to do that.
Yeah. I'm in a new relationship myself.
I was about to say, and you?
Well, what I want to say is that there's a similar, I think we're similar in the way that we're looking at this. Like, I am doing my very best to be present, take it day by day. And I think, we could future think and be like, that's anxiety.
It's so hard not to. I can't stop myself.
I know,
The
but just
future
being
is
present
haunting.
is very mature and very adult and just being like,
Yes.
and he's teaching me that. So, because I think I can be anxious and just way too focused on future. And it's like, no, I just want to be present and enjoy and take it day by day.
I know.
It's hard to do.
But so important.
But it's beautiful.
It is.
It's a beautiful thing. Well, I hope everyone reads your book, Todd, because I absolutely loved it. Did you do an audio?
There's an audio part.
Oh, good.
And
Oh, thank
Kindle
goodness.
and all the things.
People have to listen to it as well as read have the text, because you're so funny and I love your voice, and I just think that would be the best part. So, thank you, Todd Baratz, for being with us today.
Thank you, Robin. It was so good to see you. I love seeing you.
I'm going to close our little our discussion with a blessing, and these are all from your words from your book.
Oh, okay.
May we move forward, write our own stories, not hold back, and experiment with everything. Fuck up and get it wrong. Learn from it and go do it differently with new insights. May we develop a love of life, a deep appreciation for all of life's ups and downs, for not just the joy of it, but also the heartbreak and sorrow. You talk a lot about that, about embracing the pain in our lives, right? Okay, it's not just all ups, there's downs too. And may we understand relationships can be painful, yet they also provide the key to crafting a fulfilling life. Yes, they do.
They do.
They really do. Thank you, Todd Baratz.
Thank you, Robin.
We love you.
I love you too.
Thank you so much for listening. Visit realloveready.com to continue learning with us. Please rate and review this podcast. Your feedback helps us get you the tools and guidance you need to form more loving relationships and create positive change in your life. We at Real Love Ready acknowledge and express gratitude for the Coast Salish people, the stewards of the land on which we work and play, and encourage you to take a moment to acknowledge and express gratitude for those that have stewarded and continue to steward the land that you live on as well. Many blessings and much love.